In fact, it's a brand new addition to the Midlands heritage, a museum housing the largest collection of British cars in the world, complete with a unique archive collection spanning the history of British motoring in words and pictures. This is the culmination of hard work, persistence and single-minded determination to turn a concept into reality. There are more than 300 assorted vehicles here representing more than 100 years of motoring history. When work finishes and the museum is ready for the public next week, it'll be the pinnacle of one man's career and a tribute to the memories of cars gone by.
It's every curator's dream to be able to conceive a museum from scratch and put their ideas into being. We had a vast collection of vehicles that represents a large section of the motor industry. They were stored in all sorts of warehouses, other places around Warwickshire and London, and for many years we've been trying to put it together and put a proposal to Rover some 2.5 years ago, and they saw the great sense of having their pedigree in one location, and hence the building.
How would you describe the building?
Well, a combination of Art Deco and Star Wars. A very efficient, very modern building on one hand, but with the whole style based on the 30s. So it's a friendly building. It's a building that someone can relate to. It's not a Pompidou Centre. It's not a festival hall. And hopefully it's a building that will grow old gracefully. We've turned it into a 65-acre countryside park. There's a Land Rover off-road jungle track that really is a very good cure for constipation. It's a splendid demonstration the public can see, and over weekends may even get an opportunity to be driven in the vehicles. But it does make it fun, and that's the whole idea. People who come here must be alive. And it isn't a static car museum. When it's fine, the real way to see a car is where it's being driven. And if you look at the design of the building, there's a circular path that goes round it. So over weekends and activities where a lot of people are here, we take a vehicle out, an Edwardian vehicle. People say, oh, they aren't built like they used to be. And my reaction as a modern car is, thank God, a modern car's easy. You try and drive one of these, you need about 12 arms and 5 legs to operate it successfully, so, you know.
Well, dressed in period style like this, I need about 20 arms and legs to operate this one successfully. Obviously, to drive a car like this, one needs a flunky to do the dirty work, although I'm not utterly convinced to be wearing a boiler suit in the 1900s. This is a 1909 Albion with a top speed of 30 miles an hour. And just to make life interesting, the accelerator's on the wrong side. And let me tell you, trying to negotiate a pig of a clutch like this in petticoats is no easy matter. I can just about manage to go in a straight line, but turning corners and negotiating this incredible gear lever system and a hand throttle, well, that's another matter. Oh, for power steering. Oh, there's a car coming. Whoa. I can't stop him. Can I get through there, Bob? Yeah, got it. Woo. Thank you, that was fantastic. Absolutely brilliant.
Starting this car isn't like a modern vehicle. Normally, before you'd start, you check the throttle is closed, the mixture is weak, and the ignition is retarded. You can then turn on the ignition, and you spin the gearbox with the clutch in. So if you actually push that into gear and spin it, let the clutch out, the engine turns over, and if you're lucky, it starts. A tank. This really is the ultimate enthusiast delight. Magnificent car. It's a bit of a handful though. If you're actually driving at speed, and I've been fortunate to drive it with the police escort at over 90, it does tend to wander all over the road. I feel like it's the ultimate ego trip for the man who loves motor cars. Fascinating vehicle. As I say, it's a bit of a handful to keep under control.
And it's not just cars that are here. In the archive, there are literally millions of pieces of paper, photographic plates, technical drawings, and old film. Can you think of any particular information you've got in your archive that is of special interest?
We have some film that goes back to the 1920s and 30s. I think one of my favourite pieces is one of the very early sound films where you actually have Sir Herbert Austin, as he was in those days, talking to camera. And it's not that successful because it's just as if the lip sync has gone ever so slightly wrong, but it's quite funny to watch. And that must be one of the few examples when he was actually caught by the camera.
Doing what?
He was literally trying to persuade people to buy one of the new Austin 10 cars.
For this my film has been devised. Through it I give you, the British public, the best of all reasons why you should buy British. I aim to show that in doing so you stimulate progressive enterprise, which is leading the world to better and more prosperous times. You now realize, I hope, that in buying British you encourage progress.
Of course, we all know in this day and age, how important it is to test cars for safety, and people would crash them into barriers. But I did something similar even in the early 1930s. We have a wonderful film showing a Morris Isis car of about 1932, which literally is being destruction tested and it's being driven through a brick wall. They pour petrol over it and set fire to it, and it still starts afterwards. It's quite amazing.
It's a bit excessive.
You would forgive it if it broke up completely, but not so the faithful Morris. Words are hardly needed to describe a car of this sort. And after that, we gave the old stager a trial by fire. Petrol was lavishly poured all over the engine and the body and purposely set alight. This picture, incidentally, will give you a good idea of the effectiveness of the type of fire extinguisher that you can carry on your own car. It shows you that providing even a fierce petrol fire is tackled in its reasonably early stages, it can be got under by proper use of portable fire extinguishers. But even treatment of this kind doesn't seem to daunt a Morris, and immediately the fire was out, the driver got in, pressed the self-starter, and the engine responded at once. Next, in search of still fresh fields to conquer, we tried to see what would be the result of running the car through a brick wall. There she goes, right through the center. Well, we don't expect cars to stand up to that kind of treatment, but this one nearly did. Naturally, the headlamps began to look a trifle second-hand, and the windscreen was broken. But being of triplex glass, it did not fly or hit the driver's face. It was perfectly cheerful even after this ordeal.
Now, I know one of the ones that Peter Mitchell mentioned to me, it's one of his favourites because it's so absurd and certainly very sexist, isn't it?
It's typical of that sort of period, I suppose, where you could make a joke out of these things and talking about, you know, a particular good gear change for a woman, I suppose, appealed to the older generation.
You wouldn't get away with it today, would you?
I don't think so.
Good gear changing for a woman.
Nice compliment from a man.
You ought to hand it to the men who created a gearbox so silent and responsive.
Yes, it is rather wonderful, isn't it? All those gears and things whizzing round so quietly under one's feet.
Well, nearly all the gears in this gearbox of yours are in constant mesh. That means they're connected to their shafts by couplings to transmit the power. You see?
I'm afraid I don't see.
Well, it begins with the gear blank, which is produced in a powerful forging machine that performs 6 separate operations. The final one being to separate the shaped blank from the bar on which it has been formed. Of course, all this happens before the teeth are cut.
I thought it was only babies who cut teeth, but go on.
Then, amongst other processes, the forged blank has to be pickled and cooked.
Would Mrs. Beeton approve of that, do you think?
I'm sure she would. The internal diameter is first broached out.
Poached? After pickling and cooking?
No, broached.
I thought it was all due to my good gear changing. But the credit for silence, ease of control, and pleasant travel must go to the Austrian designers and engineers.
Here we are in the archive with masses of stuff here. Can you put a price on it?
That's something we just don't do. We're not concerned with any monetary value of the things. We're concerned with information, and that is simply priceless. Something you just can't put a value on at all.
Having said that, there must be more items here, a lot of great interest, of course, but some more interesting than others. What about, say, some of the more fascinating things, particularly in your photographs?
Well, I think that, to a degree, the more older the information is, the records are, the more interesting they become. For instance, on the photographic side, we have pictures that go virtually back to the turn of the century, especially from the old Wolseley factory in Birmingham, which show how the cars were built in those days before the assembly line, and of course of the cars themselves. And that, I think, is very, very interesting indeed.
In a changing world, the Riley Kestrel will still be modern in 1936. Prices from £325.
The steering gives me a thrill every time I take the car out.
A new improved series on Wolseley Hornet chassis. Extra room, long sweeping wings, drop winding wind airs, safety glass throughout, £280.